Hey everyone, it's Ken again, and I want to share something with you that will, probably be interesting, but also it should be both a warning and also a hope. Hosea 6. This is a important Bible verse or Bible reference for us for several reasons. But first, let me just say that what I'm going to share with you, um, I can't be dogmatic about it, but I think it makes sense. And I think that we need to be aware of the geopolitical chaos going around us is actually the chaos, the kind of chaos that has to happen to set up for the end times. And when I say end times, I'm talking about the tribulation. I'm talking about the Antichrist being revealed. I'm talking about a lot of persecution on the church. I'm talking about the mark of the beast. And I'm talking about eventually the rapture, and then I'm talking about eventually the Battle of Armageddon. So I'm talking about the big stuff here. And I think Hosea is talking about the big stuff. So that's why I'm talking about it. Let's start by understanding a little bit about the book of Hosea. Hosea was a prophet in Israel, and he was tasked by God to live a life that would be an example to Israel of what they were doing to God. And so God instructed him to marry a prostitute, and she was someone that Hosea loved. He was supposed to love her, but she was disobedient, and she was adulterous. She wasn't faithful. But Hosea loved her in spite of that, and he literally went after her and he bought her back. Literally bought her back. Um, so Hosea is living a life, and his wife is really playing the part of Israel, and Hosea is playing the part of God in his life's example. And so, as people would look at Hosea, and as we look at Hosea, we can see how hurt God was because of the way Israel was sinning and Israel was not being faithful to God. We can feel God's pain through Hosea. And Hosea writes in chapter 6 something that's really interesting, and I think it's really timely. So let me start just in verse 1. Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us. Now, first off, when we hear the word us, we have to stop thinking about us because this was written to the Jews. Okay? So when we hear us, in fact, I'm going to just change it. I'm going to put Israel in there. Come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn Israel, and he will heal Israel. He has wounded Israel, and he will bind up Israel's wounds. Okay, so he has torn Israel, and they're wounded. They're wounded, and so he's describing punishment. He's describing a period of time when Israel is not in the good grace of God. And so then he says, he will bind up Israel's wounds. He will revive us, Israel, after 2 days. And on the third day, he will raise Israel up so Israel can live in his presence. Think about that. He's talking about 2 days. Now, it's not 48 hours. We know that. He's talking about 2 days. When the Israelites would read that and they'd see 2 days, what would they think? Would they think 2 weeks? 2 days, 2 months, 2 years, 200-year periods? How about 2,000-year periods? Well, we know that Peter tells us that a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day to the Lord. And when you think about the created week, the creation week, that was 7 days. And what if God had created a 7-day week for redemption? What if from the time Adam sinned, God had started a 7-day clock, meaning 7,000 years? Now let me put this in perspective. If you go from a period of time after creation, say put Adam around 33 years old, which would be similar to the age that Christ was when he lived on earth, and Adam and Christ are often compared as mirror images. So if you said that sin happened around Adam's 33rd age, what happens in 4,000 years? Christ comes. Christ is born, about 4,000 years. Well, not about. It could be exactly 4,000 years. We don't know when Adam sinned, but if Adam's sin started the week, because before Adam's sin, everything was perfect. But the moment Adam sinned, God had to begin a plan of redemption. And if he planned that for a week, a 7-day week or a 7,000 year period, in around 4,000 years, and it could have been 4,000 years specifically, Christ was born. Okay, so let's call that the first 4 days of this week. Now, Hosea is referring to 3 more days. He's referring to 2 days that Israel's going to be wounded. And at the end of 2 days, Israel's going to be revived. And after they're revived, they're going to be able to rise up and live in Christ's presence. So, when would the clock start for those 2 days? Well, I would say that Israel was wounded when, after Christ ascended, when the Jews killed Stephen. And shortly after the Jews killed Stephen, I think the Jews killing Stephen might have been the impetus for this. But after the Jews killed Stephen, sometime after that, Paul was taken out and converted and given a mission to go to the Gentiles. His orders were to go to the Gentiles and to develop the Gentile church. And what we see happening in the New Testament, after the Gospels are closed out, after Acts is closed, or in the middle or toward the end of Acts, we start seeing the church become God's conduit to the earth. Instead of it being Israel, Israel is no longer God's conduit. They have rejected Christ, and God has set them aside. He has put them in a period of punishment, and a period where He is not really their God. Now, He can certainly save individual Jews, and He does save individual Jews, but He's not working through the nation of Israel right now. Right now, He's working through the church. So if the 2 days begins around the time of Stephen's death or Paul's ministry start, and you go 2,000 years from then, we are getting probably to within 10, 20 years of the Lord's return. And if it's the 10 years, that means we're only 2 or 3 years away from when the tribulation begins. I hope that makes sense to you. I'm not naming a day, I'm not naming a time, but I think we can narrow it down based on this passage. And so, looking at the geopolitical world, we see globalization happening. Joe Biden has already said first day, he's going to get us into the Paris Climate Treaty. That means that we're going to have somebody outside of America dictating to us not just climate policy, but economic policy. Businesses are going to be incented or disincented. Businesses are going to close. Regulations are going to impact some businesses in a way that's going to make them very hard to function, all because we're trying to get lined up with this globalized climate change pact. Davos, if you're not familiar with it, a lot of powerful people are talking about a great reset. They're going to use coronavirus and maybe another coronavirus that's going to come along later this year as a reason to reset the economy. Basically, I'm going to get in a little bit of coronavirus talk here, but basically the response to coronavirus has been part of a plan that's been around for a long time to do a great reset. And part of that plan is to destroy smaller businesses and get people into gross unemployment rates, which will make them more necessary for the government to come in and help. And there might be a time in the near future where they're talking about guaranteed incomes for everybody. As we see technology taking out jobs, replacing people with machines, there's the thought there's going to be more and more unemployment, and that the governments are going to have to create a whole new economic model for everyone to be able to be successful. So we're seeing the globalization happening. We're seeing the thought processes for it. We're seeing justifications for it. We're even seeing some of the truth that they're, like the machines replacing people is happening. So that's all there. And then we look at the stuff happening over in Israel and in the Middle East. Trump had 3 or 4 countries sign a peace treaty. And we know that in the end times, we are going to have a time when the northern kingdom, which is probably Turkey and possibly Iran with them, are going to invade Israel. And Israel's going to look to their southern neighbors who they have a peace treaty with. And the southern neighbors are going to turn their back. They're going to break their peace with Israel and leave Israel naked to the aggression from the northern kingdom. And that's all in prophecy. And so what Trump did to get those 3 or 4 countries to sign peace treaties, he began the process that has to be in place for this great this great military victory that Turkey's going to have in Israel. So, folks, we are close. I think, if 2,000 years began shortly after Christ ascended into heaven, that was probably around 32. So if the clock could have started sometime as early as 32 AD, and that means that 2023 would be 7 years from 2030. We're close. So guys, understand we got to keep our eyes focused on God, even if it's not close, even if I'm wrong. We need to be focused on God. It's not like we get a pass if it's not close. But folks, it's close. I truly believe it's close. Hosea is giving us strong clues that it's close. And we got to look at it from Israel's perspective. How long have they been kind of set apart? God, they're still there. God still loves them. God still plans to use them. But right now, he has allowed Israel to fall away. They rejected Christ. He's chosen the church to become his conduit. And in the end times, he's going to bring Israel back into the forefront. He's going to restore that relationship with Israel. They're still his chosen people. And he's going to use them in the end days to bring forth the final redemption. Folks, we are very close. Look at Hosea 6. Ask yourself questions about the things that are in there. Ask yourself, who is he speaking to? Who is the us? How was the wound occur? How did the wound occur? What does it mean to bind up their wounds? What does revival or revive look like for them? What does 2 days? What does the third day mean? And what does it mean he will raise them up, and that they will live in his presence? Folks, it's all right there.